We found this, and it has been used in an exhibit at the Historical Society sometime in the past. And it was kind of fitting tonight because when we're talking about where, this is one that we didn't know where it was. It's unidentified. For some reason they used it. On the back side of it, it doesn't say anything. It's just doesn't say anything. So we looked at it closely, and right here is a calendar that's dated 1935. You can read it. The armory is listed here with a handbill. The Rock County Progressive Party is listed here with a dance, and that's April 24th. And then this is an ad for the Monday after Easter. And so dating those, we found that wasn't just a calendar left hanging on the wall, because the dates of those matched up with 1935. So we thought, well, okay, we better sit down and try and identify this. We looked at the building. You can see that it's on a slope. This side and this side are different. So it was on Milwaukee Street or some street where you had a slope to the street. It wasn't like Main Street where it's just all flat. We went to the 1935 city directory. And if you look right here, it says billiards. So we thought, okay, that's where we'll start. Well, if you go to the 1935 city directory and you look up billiards, there's 6 or 7 listed. And none of them matched up. Some of them were addresses that we already knew not to be this one. One was 11 North Main, and that was Star Billiard, and we know that it's not that. One of them was a cigar store that was 105 East Milwaukee, and we know that it's not that because we have pictures. So the rest of the addresses didn't jive. So then we thought, okay, we've got that billiards is so worn off, it must be before that. And they don't have billiards anymore, but they just didn't take it off of the glass. So I went back into the late 20s and the 30s, and there was still nothing that really jived. The only address that we came up with that it could possibly be was 203 West Milwaukee. And that building is torn down. And it would have been right next to a very large building that was on the corner there. And I'm not convinced that that's really it. So it's one of those things, is you wonder where something was, and you can go through the process and you can get so far, and then you're speculating and guessing. If anybody wants to look at it close, they can look at it here. There's a magnifying glass. We couldn't see a street number. There is a reflection in the glass that appears to be a house that would be across the street. There's a roof line on it, and you can see it. If you see, there's a tree right there that's a reflection in the glass. And that's the same thing that a lot of people go through when you get a photo. And that's maybe what we thought would happen tonight, is that somebody would bring one in that they knew was Janesville but didn't know where. We have a lot of unidentified houses, and of course they change a lot. But you know, somebody says, well, I know it was Grandpa's house, but I don't know the exact address. So that's kind of the process that you go through to when you get a photo. And this is just one that we pulled out and we had before. So in the record someplace, this is identified, and we'll find it someday. But for tonight, it was just very fitting, and it really did fit in well. The other thing that you got tonight is a copy of an ad from the Wrigley Chewing Gum Company. And we're going to spend a minute looking at that. If you look at that, it again is something that came to us at the Historical Society. And it was just presented and no history behind it. It's not dated. So that was one of the first things that was kind of intriguing is who was H. Tucker, and when was this sold? Or when was this sent? And if you look at the little guy in the corner and you take it's a two-color ad that was sent, and this was sent to him. Well, H. Tucker turns out to be Harley J. Tucker, and he was a machinist. His wife's name was Fern. They had a daughter named Twyla. And this ad dates, he is listed in both the 1941 and the 1943 city directories. But he is not listed in 1946, and he's not listed before 1941. So we just grabbed, we looked again at the graphics of the ad and just said, well, that's about this time frame, and so it was during World War II. So you go from what you can figure out, what you know, and then you progress from there. If you notice on here, there are a number of streets names that no longer exist, and that's where we got the idea for this little quiz that you all had when you came in. Why some of those street names changed, we know, or we can speculate on. When they changed, you can go back and find, but all of a sudden it just occurs to you that they changed. And it's one of those things that just it's very slow, and one or two change. You don't just take out the map and say we're going to change all the street names. There's a reason for that. So if you look at that, you'll find I highlighted some of them on there, and I don't know if they come out, but you've got Eastern Avenue and Western Avenue and Bluff Street and Pleasant Street, St. Mary's, and I think that's all that are different on there from what they are today. So we're going to spend a minute, and Phil's going to go through the quiz and see how many people got the old street names to the new street names correct. You know, it's like doing, sometimes it's like doing one of those puzzles where you go from the outside and try to get to the inside by tracing a line through there. Sometimes it's easier to go from the inside out to the outside. And so on this list, there's probably some that work the same way, where you know the street now, and you say, oh yeah, that used to be this, rather than if somebody gave you the old street name, trying to get what street that is today. So Phil, why don't you go through the little quiz there?
Okay, I shall. Everyone have their quiz filled out?
And no cheating.
No blanks? Everyone has an answer for every new street and old? Well, I'm sure if I would have cheated and looked at the answers, I would have gotten them all. But anyway, let's start, and then I can kind of explain what I think is happening, and some of it makes sense. Some of it is destination oriented, if you think about it. But First Street North, what do you think? What does that correspond with today? Anybody answer?
J.
Pardon?
I said J. Not wrong, not right.
Yeah, you got it right.
Oh,
and that's East Wall Street. Now, if you think about it as Milwaukee Street as a demarcation, the first street north is Wall Street. Okay? So I think, and so if you think of that now as we go through them, you know, I don't know the answer, try to guess, and it's kind of fun. Okay, 2nd Street South would be, now we're on, let's see. No, yeah, look at that name change. I can't remember that name change, but it's F. Van Buren. That would be, so that would be Court Street, oh, yeah, let's see. Anyway, there's a logic to it, to a degree. So now 3rd Street South would be then what? No, from 3rd Street is Holmes. Now if we go to 4th Avenue, that's a real, that doesn't make sense. I don't think there's a way of figuring that out. That just was named for whatever was named, and that is East Centerway.
4th Avenue Bridge.
4th Avenue, right, that's what I was gonna ask that, if anybody remembered that, that's what I was brought up.
Yeah.
You know, and that was a lot of commerce went on around there, a lot of the mills were located there. You know, it was a very important area, it was a first source of power for a lot of things. Okay, if we go to Bluff Street,
North and South Park.
and think about it, that makes sense, right? If you think of the city and that really is, the river is low and you're coming up that bluff all the way along that Parker Drive, North and South Parker Drive kind of run.
And that's also, I believe that was changed when they built Arrow Park. And that's what made it is Parker is because it connected the two Parker facilities.
Okay, East North Street, now there's a, I mean, that doesn't make any sense. But I
wonder why they changed that one.
Yeah, right. But I think back then, I think you had to orient people. People weren't as literate as we are today, and a lot of people, some people couldn't read. So you had a mixture of different nationalities here that didn't necessarily know English, but they could maybe get north, south, east, west, kind of right, so you could get pointed in the right direction. So what would that make sense? East North Street. That's North Avenue. So now everybody's got to be able to get the next one, right? East, South
Street.
South Avenue, right.
Probably drove the post office nuts.
No, I bet a lot of people can get the next one. Think about a destination, think about where a street was headed where it pointed to like a compass point. So we have Galena Street, and that would be, that's West Racine Street. If you follow it straight out on a map all the way across Wisconsin, you get in Galena or awfully close to it. Okay, North Street. Anybody have a answer for that one? That one doesn't really make sense either. That is Johnson Street, which is, if you know Johnson Street, it's one off of Racine Street.
That could have been a boundary. There's some of these that pertain to, that I think pertain to to Rockport as a city. And that could have been almost the north boundary of Rockport. So that could have been an original name.
Yeah, because if we remember, there were how many plots before we really settled on Janesville? 3 or 4 different plotted areas before Janesville was picked. All right, let's, Park Place. Any ideas on Park Place?
Yes.
Boy, you're high score here. Yeah, that's St. Lawrence. Park Place, St. Lawrence. Next to the courthouse park. Right. That makes sense. You know,
Park Place actually had 3 streets. It went all the way around Courthouse Park.
I'm sorry?
There were 3 park places at one
Oh.
point,
Uh,
on all 3 sides of Courthouse Park.
Okay, someone in the audience had just mentioned, I don't know if you hear that, tape, that street went, Park Place went all the way around Courthouse Park. So that makes more sense, it delineated the park, on 3 sides anyway. I didn't know that, thank you. Pleasant Street. Western, yep.
And there again, I heard this evening, a comment that makes a lot of sense, is that Pleasant Street had to have their name changed when our prefix went to Pleasant on our telephones. When we went to, from 4 numbers, we went to 5 with a prefix.
Right.
And that makes perfect sense too,
Yeah, if you
because
remember.
there again, confusion.
It was PL.
Yep.
I do remember that. Yeah. Okay, St. Mary's Street. Memorial, very good. St. Mary.
Going along with that, I don't think we got it on here, but it's another one that we talked about,
Oh, yeah.
is what did it connect to on the other side? They changed that when they put the bridge in. When they put in, there was no need for Memorial until they put Memorial Bridge in, which now isn't Memorial Bridge, but, or is Memorial Bridge, but it connected 2 streets.
There's Magnolia.
Magnolia was on the other side, and again,
It went to
that
Magnolia.
went to Magnolia. You know, and in fact, on this map, I don't even think that Magnolia is on there, because that wasn't even a platted street until much later.
Well, okay, we're on School Street now. There's a clue in that. West Van Buren.
And it was,
And what school was that?
and also in there was, it was right off of Center, and something that we found when we did this is Center Avenue used to be spelled Centre. And School Street and was changed, School Street came off of that, and Second Center Street came off of that. And both of those were changed to Van Buren and McKinley. So that was probably something to do with, it done at about the same time maybe as assassination or something like that. So, and there are a lot more streets that change names. There were streets on here that are on the left-hand column that were something else before they were what they were there. And there are probably some that are gonna change again. I know we had one this year as a street name change in one of the new subdivisions, because when they got it done, it was confusing to the post office. And so they changed the name because there was such a large jump in numbers from where it ended on one side of the street and dead ended and then came out. So before they got any houses on there or whatever, they changed the name of it so that the numbering didn't look really, really bad. So.
What date is that,
This one is 1878. It's,
No, this was
This one is-
1929.
oh, all right.
Yeah, that was,
That one over there is, okay,
thank you for that.
okay, all right.
One last street, Western Avenue.
That's right.
Yep, okay, good, everybody got that one. And again, that was another plot before Janesville was picked. It was, there were 4 of them in the running, and much like the state capitol before it went to Belmont and various places.
What year was Janesville decided that?
Well, it was in court.
I didn't hear the question.
What year was Janesville decided?
The name Janesville?
Name Janesville?
What was it, incorporated as a city in 1848?
Yeah.
Henry James
somewhere before that.
Maybe, maybe we'll talk about that next time.
Yeah, right.
Now, we're gonna go back, we're gonna switch it back to the Wrigley's ad. Question, sure.
I was just gonna mention this list of street names and what they used to be called. The Historical Society provided the library with an even longer list. And it's all indexed in our local history database online. And if you ever have a question how to find that, call or stop by the reference desk. And
So
we've
Sue-
got this list, it's on our webpage, and you can get to it.
Sue from the library is saying that all these streets are indexed here at the library, so you can, if you have any questions about, you have a name and you wish to know what it was before, they're all indexed here, they're easily accessible, and I'm sure she'd be happy to help anybody with any questions that you have.
Go to the reference desk.
Or you go to the reference desk and ask, and they'll point you in the right direction. Thank you.
I do have a note here that Janesville was Blackhawk before it was Janesville, and I think the post office said that it was going to be Janesville.
Yeah. That could very
I'm
well.
not certain, but what Gail is saying here, that it was Blackhawk before it was Janesville, and she thinks perhaps the post office determined that it should be Janesville. But I'm not certain about any of that.
That's true.
I think I
That's
remember
true.
that, yeah.
Henry James wanted it to be named Blackhawk, but the US Postal Service wouldn't allow that.
Right.
They named it after him.
Another
I
comment
seem to
saying,
remember that because, and I think it had something to do with, there was already a Blackhawk in Illinois or something like that, so, yeah.
very good.
Well, back to the Wrigley's letter. I'm glad, first of all, that we don't have the Wrigley's gum because it might be a little stale today that came with this. But there were a few of these businesses, well, actually, there was more than a few, but we narrowed it down to a few that we thought were interesting, that we thought were interesting. And we thought, well, let's do a little history on those, and let's look and see what was going on. The first one we'd like to talk about is, if you look at the bottom of the one column there, it's Pat Connors and the Cozy Inn. And it just so happens that they're together. They have the same address, and of course, Cozy Inn is still there. So it was interesting to me because when we looked through the list, out of all of the places on this list, Cozy Inn is the only one that's still there. There are some others that have like businesses, but it's the only one that still has the same name. And of course, Pat Connors, I thought, well, we all know that Corners is there now. It's been there a pretty long time. You know, you think, okay. Well, we went back and we looked, and one of the things, like I say, that we tried to do was to come up with a date for this letter. And before it was a tavern, we found out that Connors was actually a variety store. And I don't know what a variety store would have been back in the 30s, but you know, we can think that it's a five and dime kind of place. And then it ended up as, like I say, as Corners and Cozy Inn, and you know, you would think you could put that all together. Those two things have been there for just about as long as anything downtown. Then the other one another one that caught our eye was Bugs Grocery. And part of that was because it was on Western Avenue, which was Rockport Road. And part of that was because we knew some of the history of that building. It's no longer there. It burned down back around 1990. The upper level burned, and then they had to tear the building down. But it was the Bugs Grocery. Then it went to Payton Place, which was the Bugs family as well. And they were there until they were forced out, and we had the fire. So that was one that they also owned. If you look on here, the Bugs and Graves, they owned that in conjunction. But the Bugs family was a grocer family.
And you know, Lee, there were a lot of you don't see it anymore. Maybe it'll come back someday, but there were a lot of neighborhood groceries. And Bugs' Grocery was a full meat shop. I mean, they took in, I won't say meat on the hoof, but I mean, they took in cattle and you know, beef, sides of hogs, and made cutlets and pork chops and steaks and all that out of it right there. I mean, it was pretty incredible. And there were a lot of that area is kind of is known as the Fourth Ward. There were a lot of it was Danny's Grocery up, which was across on Locust, across from the original location of Great Brewery, and then the Triangle Grocery down near the park, Fourth Ward Park, and but anyway, so you had things were different then. Instead of big mega stores, we had little neighborhood grocers serving certain areas of where you know people live.
And that brings us to one that was just a little bit bigger than those little local ones on this list, as Adam Annie's. And Adam Annie's had the confectionery shop downtown. Adam Annie's also had the grocery store. And it's still, the building is still there. It's down on South Main Street, close to the ice arena. It went actually from Adam Annie's to the Norge Laundry and Dry Cleaning. It was that for a long time. It was probably something else in between, but we didn't find that. Then it went to Joe's Used Furniture. Then it was a dance studio, and today it's the Antique Mall of Janesville. And it has been continually reused, but that was like a double wide. That was a big grocery store in the day. And it had apartments and so forth upstairs, but it was a large grocery store. The next thing on this list that caught our eye and helped us to get the date down just even a little narrower was the Sport Shop. And the Sport Shop is listed there at 315 West Milwaukee, and that is next to the Monterey Hotel. There's a series of calendars over there from Commercial Bank. And you can see on this one where it's right next to the Jeffers Theater, pictured, and it had been there for a long time as a sport shop, but it's one of those, like I say, that let us get this down real close, because for some reason it changed its name quite frequently. And before 1941, it was a cigar store at that address. So we know that it wasn't the Sport Shop. But then it changed to the Sport Shop, and by 1943, it had changed hands and went to Hack's Sport Shop. Then it went to Johnson Sport Shop. Then it went to Don's Sport Shop. Then it went to Clatworthy Sport Shop. And then it finally wasn't a sport shop anymore, and it went to Balfour Optometry. And today, it's the office for Graft Investments. It's still there. The upper level is about the same. The lower level, of course, like most of the downtown properties, has changed. But that's one. That brought us down to between 41 and 43 for getting a date to this ad.
You know, another thing, Lee, that is interesting, particularly about that one, and also Bugs' Groceries, the people that owned those, or perhaps not owned the building, but operated the businesses there, lived above the business that they had. You know, that was quite common. Some of the most influential people, you would think that they would have a mansion somewhere else and conduct it, but they lived above their businesses, and they were right there, and everybody knew one another, and it was really quite different than we have today.
And then I think the last one that we'll talk about, one of the last ones that we'll talk about is the one that had what I thought was the neatest name. And it's been the neatest name for some downtown businesses that I've seen in a long time. And of course, that is Sam and John's Coney Island Lunchroom. And Sam and John's was there for a long time. It's just one of those things, how do you come up with that name? And it just didn't occur overnight. And of course, they must have gone to Coney Island at some time and come back and had this idea. You got to think that. But it was part of the Carl West Side block, after we got to looking at this. And that's C-A-R-L-E. And there must have been an east side and a south side. There must have been 6 or 7 Carl blocks where they developed them. And what they were was you built a big store and then you sold the storefronts or rented the storefronts out in front. And it was like a shopping center today. It was one person would do this and then individual shops down below. And it was in this big, large building. Again, in that same year, there's a picture of the West Side Carlisle block. And in 1961, it was still standing. But now, of course, it's a parking lot. And I cannot remember why that building or how that building got torn down. It was a huge 3-story building. And I thought, I went through and I said, oh, why did that get torn down? And I thought, oh, I can't remember that. And I never went back to look, but there had to be a reason for that large a building, and I don't remember a fire there. So that's one of those that, you know, I liked it because of the name, and you can always see it. It's on, yeah, it's
almost
way
see it.
up
Yeah.
here on this photo.
It's here on this photo, and this is West Milwaukee Street. So it gives you an idea of the types of buildings that were on Milwaukee Street and a bit about locations. But that one is on the far end. It was a big, big building, and I also don't recall why it was taken down. But this is a vintage photo of about 1917.
It's dated, I think it was, yeah, it's
So
1917, I think. And that has also in it a couple of drugstores, and there's one drugstore off of this list that I kind of wanted to talk about, and that's McEwen Bus. And I think we have a picture of that, Jean. It is number 18. And McEwen Bus was there for a long, long time, 14 South Main. There's a picture of it as Kennedy. You can see the sign says Kennedy, and then back along the face of the building it says McEwen Bus. And so that's where it was. It was next to RM Boswick, JM Boswick down a little bit, the Hayes block on the corner. And that stayed there as a drugstore until 1975. I think we looked at this picture and it's like 1962 or something like that. And then it was a music mart and so forth and so on. It's changed now, and I'm not sure today, is that where the restaurant is?
No, that's 12 something.
Okay.
14 would be part of Old Town Hall.
Right, okay. And so the building is still there. It's been, of course, refaced and so forth, but that was an example of the drugstores that were downtown, and there were a lot of them. There are a whole bunch listed on this, and these aren't even all of them. And they existed. You would think that you couldn't have one every block, but it almost seemed like there was one in every block. Then getting away a little bit from the downtown off of this list is Woodman's. And Woodman's, of course, listed on here, is listed at 922 Milton Avenue. And that's the first location, that's the little location. We all know Woodman's. They kept going farther out on Milton Avenue until they got almost as far out as they can, and they're probably looking today to go farther out, who knows. But this was the first location. And the thing that caught my eye there when we started to look it up is I had absolutely forgotten that after it was Woodman's, it was a stop and go. And you think, oh, stop and go today, they gotta have gas pumps and drive-throughs, but that's what it was. That was one of the first, what we would think of today as a convenience store in town. And yet, you know, you would think that Woodman's would never do that because they would be in somewhat direct competition, and they were only a few blocks away. But there it was, and then it went to, I think it was a couple of other things, but today it's the Castaways Thrift Shop. And probably a very good use for a building like that that's now in a more of a residential area.
Was that the first location for Woodman's? Yes.
Yeah. So, that kind of takes care of the, of something that was just given to us. And it's how much you can look at. You get a little 2-page letter. That's an ad. It's really an ad more than a letter. It was sent out to people. And you look through that and say, oh, there's 2 pieces of paper and you can talk forever on it. And so that we just really hit the surface on that. We didn't go too far. We picked out then some places that we thought around town that we thought had some significance and maybe had maybe been overlooked some other times. They weren't quite so familiar. They weren't on the top of everybody's list. They were just things that were of interest to us when we started to look. We just started to throw out names, and some of them stuck, and some of them didn't. So the first one that we want to talk about is Shirtlift Dairy. And we've got some objects from there, and we've got some photos. Shirtlift Dairy was one of the largest dairies that we had in Janesville. And again, there were a lot of them, just like drugstores. There were a lot of dairies. There was an explosion of milk, and they had to take it someplace, and they couldn't do it in these little dairies anymore. So they started to do it in bigger places. Shirtlift started in 1878, and he started on West Milwaukee Street, and he started selling ice cream. And that's basically all he did, is sold ice cream. In 1906, he bought land on Main Street, and by and he built a small factory. If we can have the next, this is the small factory on the right. By 1912, he built a larger factory and connected them. And that's, of course, really like the 2 that are here. And that remained Shirtlift Dairy until 1969. And in 1969, he got sold to Bancroft, I think it was. It was some big conglomerate. And of course, just like anything else, they took out what they needed, moved the operation to a different place, and closed the factory. Of course, it sat there empty for a number of years. And now is the Nolan Mowat Law Firm. It's on that site. So it was completely leveled and turned into the law firm. Other dairies that we had in town, I remember some of them, but I don't remember all of them. There was Cronin and Arbuthnot, Merrick, Leader, Milk Jug,
Bowman?
And Bowman was Knee and Chapel to begin with. And then it was changed to Bowman, and of course, it's destined to be torn down now. It's up by the Five Points. And there was Pure Milk Company, and that was probably Shirtlift's biggest competitor. And yet all of those, in comparison to Shirtlift, were small. So that was, we've got some other stuff from Shirtlift up here that's kind of interesting and neat stuff if you want to come up later and take a look at it.
Well, just think about it, when you had this on your porch, you filled out a little sheet here, and the fellow would come around with the truck, look at your sheet, run back to the truck, bring your cottage cheese, milk, I'm not sure about eggs, I don't remember, I'm not sure about
But if
eggs.
you weren't home to get it, it sat in there all day.
Yeah, I remember these growing up, and if you can imagine that, and delivering stuff like that right to your door. Pretty incredible. This is one of the small, like, New York ice cream, kind of vanilla, and one of their calendars, which we think
It's dated
1970,
1970,
but this looks,
but it's earlier than that. It's one where they kept tearing the numbers off, and they would keep giving you a new calendar every year. So the material that it's on probably dates to the 40s or very early 50s. So yeah. Another place that we picked, if we can roll up here, was City Ice. And Phil's going to talk about City Ice a little bit. This photo was taken in 1930.
no, 4 photos, right?
Yep.
Okay. City Ice Company. This had early beginnings. This is one of the 100-year-old or better businesses of Janesville, of which there are probably 15 or so, 15 or 20. It began in 1858 by J.M. Watson, and they had coal, wood, and ice. Instead of just ice, they had coal and wood, which makes sense. Then in 1887, they went to ice only. And again, that was like the dairies. If you remember, there's little cards, and you set it in your window, and you'd have 25 or 15 or 50 pounds or whatever that you wanted. Whatever number was up, they could see it from the street, because they delivered everything to your door with horse-drawn carts at first, wagons at first, and then later went to trucks. But
Horse-drawn ones are here.
yeah,
There's 3 of them. There might be a 4th one tucked behind there, but there's 3 that are clearly visible.
now, according to the research I did, they have 1930 on them. They have a mixture of trucks and horse-drawn carts. What I found was the last, they changed from horse-drawn to trucks in 1940. So whatever.
So they use those horses
Yeah.
almost till World War II.
But then, they're in their same location. In 1911, they bought land at Goose Island, which everybody knows that, right? Right, tracks of park, and expanded. And you know where they used to take their ice right over the imagine. Do we have that photo? We don't, I'm sorry, go back, we don't.
Sorry.
We have it on a calendar, where they're out cutting ice on the river right behind, where the dam is now.
Right off of the river.
Right off the
Just
river, and then
bring it up on a big levee ramp and
yeah, right into a big
pack it in.
warehouse. Right, pack it with between hay and straws and everything to keep it so it would stick together. But they cut on the river until 1930.
And this cart is an early one when they still had their office downtown. They had their office downtown where Brennan Style Law Firm is.
Right in the corner there, yeah.
And then, of course, they had what we would maybe call a factory or the work store or whatever it is, that was down yonder, a little farther down on Main Street.
Yeah, same street, but anyway, they were, I suppose you wanted to have your office closer to the center of commerce, which would have been Main and Milwaukee, and it was right on that corner, 12 and 14, I think, North Main, right. It had various owners, just like all these other businesses did, but one of the early numbers, or early names that was associated with was the Atwoods, Atwood Avenue, I would imagine came from there. But in 1954, the family that runs it to this day, Ed Schultz, purchased it, and he changed the name back. That it had been City Ice and Coal, and he changed it back to City Ice Company, which is what it's known as today. They did their last home delivery with trucks, of course, by then, in 1971. They did deliver to a Miss Dennis on Logan Street, which is down off of South Main Street on the hilly area there. Actually down by the other dairy that, or by the ice rink, I think, comes in by the ice rink. In 73, Ed's son, Earl, became a partner. In 75, there was an arson fire there. We're not trying to connect it to it anyway. This is a matter of fact. And that is the longest run Janesville business at the same location. It's not it's old, it's not the oldest, but it's the one that's been at the same location. The only one that's been at the same location.
City Ice is right there at that spot, and that's the part of the building, that part of the building that faces us right there is still the part that's there. It's the part on the back side that burned. And you would think, well, how can an ice house burn? Well, what they had in those, how they were made, is they had cork in the walls. And so you had a wall that was thickly insulated with cork. And at that time, or by that time, they weren't using it that much as just a stand-alone ice house. By that time, we were refrigerating everything and freezing everything. So that building that you see there is refrigerated down, and it has a freezing unit in it, whereas the part that burned down didn't have that.
Now, I suppose while we're on this picture, we can probably talk about this little area here. And that was an early manufacturer in Janesville also. I'm not certain what we, okay. There's a picture of the Kent Corn Plant Works. We have one of them in the collection of society. It was called the Triumph. And you can see here, manufactured by A.C. Kent, Janesville, Wisconsin. The patent date on it is 1879.
If you look at this building here, then flip back, Gene, that shows right there. So the factory was right in this area here, and is down when this picture was taken. But that little area down on this side of the railroad tracks, that was a very industrial area. And in fact, this, of course, was a gas holding tank, and that area right in here was, and maybe still is, owned by Power and Light. The old Chamber and Owens building is over in here, which is now a office supply store. But the area where these were, and Kent and so forth, that was one of those environmental areas. So we've had that problem for years. That's not just Riverside, Clading, and some of those spots. And that's why there was no development down there for a long time.
And while we have this photo, I guess, what's interesting to me is the area here. Does anyone remember when there was a railroad trestle, wooden railroad trestle there? That evidently was not built yet, because that would be, unless I'm confused, that would be 4th Avenue Bridge. This is the railroad bridge above it. Now, when I was a weed nibber, there was at least one wooden, constructed on wood pilings, another railroad bridge in that area. And I think you can see, looks to me like the race here, what, do you know what this photo is?
No.
But I don't see the upper race here, that was, you know what that was, they cut a channel and opened it so that they could water power, and there was a lot of, right at the site, the first, I think lumberyard in Janesville was located right here, which would be sometime after this would have been where the power plant was built. I can't remember the name, but then of course, a lot of the milling, grist mills, flour mills, Blodgett mills, which we're gonna talk about later, that might be that right there. No, that's too far down, I think, but anyway, this area was mill after mill after mill after mill, and different businesses changed to become a mill or lumber mill, or it was very important because they had access to the water.
This is Carr's Food Store, and a lot of people don't remember this. This was taken, the date of the photo is right here in the corner, 1933. This was on the corner of Main and Court Street. It's in what would have been known originally as the Methodist Episcopal Church, and Penny's was next door. And that's where Rock County Appliance is today. I like this because of a number of things. I knew that it was a church up above. I had forgotten that the church actually sold it at one point in 1905 to the Masonic Temple. And so it went from a church to a Masonic temple up above. Today, of course, the storefronts have all changed, but the thing that I liked about this was this black glass storefront. And, you know, trying to maintain that has to be just a nightmare. It appears that these markings on here are all etched in. And they would have been etched in the glass someplace, some way, and all applied. Now, there were a number of businesses in Janesville in the 30s that had this same type of storefront. This is a little fancier than most. I believe that those letters are also etched into that glass. They're not just painted on. For years, there was the Oriental Shop. There were a number of them. A lot of these like Sam and John's and places like that had those facades on them that were basically a 2 by 2 foot square glass panel. And another interesting thing that I found when I was looking at some stuff on cars is that they had a tie-in with the Janesville Wholesale Grocery Company. And the Janesville Wholesale Grocery Company was big, but Cars actually bought them out in 1946. So by 1946, this grocery store, I believe, was gone, and Cars was no longer really in the retail end of it. They had moved all of their business to the wholesale end. And Cars and Janesville Wholesale Grocery, they operated out of one of the very large tobacco warehouses that was on the other side of Centerway by the railroad tracks. And then another, this is one of the trucks from Janesville Wholesale Grocery, which would have been sometime in that time frame when they were being bought out or just before. The Janesville Wholesale Grocery was a big deal, and for somebody that was in a retail business to come and buy them out at the time, that was big news. That was on the front page. Now this is it's a huge factory, and we have we have a couple other views of it up here on the table. This is Janesville Machine Company. And if you really want to stretch things, this started in 1869. And it went through a number of different changes of ownership, like a lot of these things, and different boards of directors and different investors. But by 1860 or by 1880, they were employing 125 people, and it wasn't this large yet. But 125 people was the largest employer in the city. They were making, of course, farm equipment, farm machinery, and it was a number of different things. There's there's a plow up here, and they had corn planters and almost anything that you can think of that was cast iron farm machinery. By 1908, they had grown to 350 employees. And again, they were the largest employer. In 1918, they were purchased by General Motors. General Motors came to town, said, well, this is what we're going to do. And they purchased, General Motors purchased this company and a company in California and merged them. The company that they bought in California was the Sampson Tractor Company. And GM had made up their mind that they were going to get into the tractor business. And so by 1918, when this was purchased, then GM, of course, did the same thing. They pulled out what they wanted, merged, brought the tractor company in, brought people with the tractor company in, brought local people in, and this factory was torn down, closed, whatever you want. It is not the GM factory, but it's. So, is there another one there? Yeah, and this is just a display that they had. You can see in the background here some of the types of implements that they were making. And this was maybe at a fair or something like that, or an exposition of some kind where they had a display. But it took a pretty big company to be able to put up a display like that. You weren't small potatoes if you were doing that.
Where was the company?
It was down along the river, by where by where Ace Hardware is. What is that? It's River Street on that side. River and Water, I get those two mixed up. River Street on that side, and it was down along in there. We have another one? Yeah, and then that brings us to the Sampson Tractor. This is the Sampson Tractor Company, and they built a new factory in 1919 down where it is today on Industrial Avenue. I think back then it was 1000 Industrial Avenue, and again today they've changed that name again. And but anyhow, the first tractor that they made, we have an ad for one of their tractors, but it was called the Iron Horse. And as you can see, $630 bought you an Iron Horse. And that was a GM's entry into the tractor business. This, of course, is not an Iron Horse. It's a later one. But what happened was that GM's venture into the tractor market was a total failure, an absolute total failure. The one article that I read, I don't know if you can imagine how much money this would be in the 1920s, but GM lost $34 million in 1920 dollars when they ventured into the tractor business. And yet, they stayed here in town. And what they did, of course, as we all know, is Samson Tractor. They redid the plant. They started to make automobiles. They brought in Fisher Body, and we're where we are today. So, if you want to, like I say, if you want to really stretch it, that business has basically been in business since 1869. Now, they've gone through some transformations and so forth, but it's all about iron. It's all about cast iron, and it's all about machines and wheels. And so it's really how something can fail like that, and then all of a sudden come out of the ashes, and you start to make cars with rubber wheels. So
You might mention the fact that that iron horse, there wasn't a steering wheel. It was a transition from horse-drawn, so you had reins. And that's how you pulled on the reins to go left. This one to go left, this one to go right. So probably kind of maybe a little bit antiquated, and that was part of the problem. But anyway, they did lose a huge chunk of money for that day and time.
And the last one that we want to talk about, I don't think we have a picture. No, we don't have a picture. Well, I wouldn't mind talking about that one, but we're going to talk about Blodgett Mills, and we have a flour sack over here from Blodgett Mills. That's another one of those industries that we have totally forgotten about in Janesville. We talked a little bit about dairies and that kind of thing, but we have a number of mills here in town. And I thought, well, okay, I'll just bring this up as sort of a little sidelight. And then I found one of particular interest, and then I knew that we had a flour sack. I kind of like Blodgett Mills because we stole them from Beloit. They started in Beloit in 1849. Nice and early company. But in 1898, they moved to Janesville. And there in itself, I would like to know why they moved from Beloit to Janesville, because things back then were not much different than they are now, and there wasn't a lot of interaction between the two. So how somebody got down there to convince them to come here, or how they woke up one morning and said, oh, we're going to move to Janesville, that's something that I would like to actually know. And they made their money, and most of their business was in rye and buckwheat. They didn't mess around too much with white flour. They were rye and buckwheat. And I didn't realize it, but they were still a mill, and they were still producing flour up until 1961. And I just couldn't hardly believe that. I thought, oh boy, they've been out of business a long time, back, way back, almost to the 40s. But I was really surprised to find out that they were still producing in 1961. So,
Do you know where they were located?
they were on the race, one of the races. Let's see, they were on the upper race.
On the other picture we had, I
think the very first one. Yeah.
Right where Wall Street comes down to the river, past the side of the police department there, so they were the last kind of mill on the raceway, what they call the upper raceway. I remember those big buildings, the big warehouses being there when I was 12 years old, and fished there and stuff, so.
Then we'll just go through the rest of the, there's some of these that were just of interest that we kind of threw in at the tail end. This is an inside view. We didn't have, I don't think we had many that were inside views. This is an inside view of a tavern down on South Main Street. Probably not that much different than most of them. It's not a real big one, it's not a real fancy one, but very typical. And we just thought we'd include that. What else did we have there? Oh, and that's, yeah, a picture of the Lap and Hayes block that we had, so we did that. We had part of a picture of that before where McEwen Bus, Kennedy drugstore was down at the other end. And that's that one, yeah. And then this is Badger Drug. That's another one of those drugstores that we talked about. And this is one that we just acquired this summer as far as a picture. And we just thought it was very typical of one of those out front views, just like the one that we couldn't identify.
Do you know where that was?
This was on West Milwaukee Street. It started out at River and Milwaukee, and then it moved to 123 West Milwaukee in the, it would have been in where, like Cregan's Bakery, and
Yeah.
it's like, it's in that long photo. And in that photo, it was on the corner of River and Milwaukee, and then later it moved up the block.
123 would be on the corner of Franklin and West Milwaukee, where Phones Plus is now.
It would be down a couple from there, I think.
This is River Street, and that's Badger Drug sign. And I don't, you can't really tell if, that looks like, yeah, that looks like the, what was there, that's where that
I
picture's
guess
from.
my question was, it didn't have anything to do with this
No.
Badger Tavern
Mm-mm.
at Forest.
No, no. And is there another one, Gene, or? Okay, that's where we are tonight. I don't know if there are any questions, or if anybody has anything, they can ask away. It was, you know, there's so much, there's tons of stuff. You can get into this and go forever with it. And the photos are, of course, just great when you get some of those early ones. And not only, you know, we talked a lot tonight about what was there in the photo and then what was after. You can also go the other way. You can find the photo and say, well, this isn't day one. You can take this photo, and that's not the day he opened. So there's, you know, what was there before? How did it look before it got there? You know, what kind of a building was there? Wooden, you know, most of these buildings that we've shown are brick buildings. Most of the ones before that were wooden. So there was always something there before, and it might have even been a teepee. So, yeah.
Yeah, I guess I have a question. One of your earlier slides was the ice wagon, and in front of a house. I was curious about the house.
The question is about the city ice wagon, and it had the People's Drugstore sign where the offices were, and the house in the back. I'm not sure about the house. We did try to identify that. It appears to be a very prominent house up on Courthouse Hill area. That would be my guess.
But I don't think it's still there. I mean, it has some pretty unique
Yeah,
architectural
it had some detail that could have been removed. You know, all of those kind of things. It had, there had to have been a reason, again, to be taking that picture in front of that house. Those guys are in their daily work clothes. So the detail that she's talking about are these window coverings, and then there's this one, and there's this little portico up
I know
here.
where it is. It's the one on Courthouse Park at the very top.
Yes,
Yeah.
Wisconsin and St. Lawrence,
Yeah.
right at the intersection.
Yeah.
Kitty corner from Jackie.
Yeah.
So, and on this, it's one of those things that we didn't point out before. It's a dirt street, folks. That's the way they were. And they were wet when it rained and dry when it wasn't. So so that's that. The second part of this thing that we're trying to do is called Who. And that's what we're going to do next, is people and who they are. And we've got a few that we're kicking around, and you can just go through these. And some of these people are older, and some of them are a little more contemporary. And that is where we're going to go with the program next. So we're going to talk about the who aspect. And she's pretty dressed up. Anyhow, we'd like to thank you all for stopping by this evening. We also would like to thank Laurel Fant and Jean Yeomans from the Public Library here, the staff at the Rock County Historical Society Archives, which is a lot of volunteers, Ruth Anderson, Dave Brisky, and Dory Copeland for the most part. And we have to thank JATV tonight, and thank Dwayne for being here tonight and doing the filming. So with that, thank you all, and maybe we'll see you when we do that.